Joining us today as our first Guerrilla talker is Arahmaiani, an artist from Indonesia, but who spends a lot of time and has spent a lot of time traveling around the world with her practice. We've had the chance to talk a little bit before, so it's nice. We're going to pick up on some conversations we've had previously. But to begin with, firstly, thank you very much for joining us here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of more aware of some of your early work, and I think that if people know about your practice, they're probably familiar with performance, and you've had a huge presence. You have a huge presence now also in Indonesia based on that practice. Could you tell us how you started working with performance at such an early time in Indonesia?
All right. I studied at art school in Bandung, Department of Painting. I tried to be a painter. But things were different from today. I mean, then there's no art market. There's no support for painting practice. I was young. I was poor. But I want to say something through my art. And but I was trained as a dancer and doing martial arts, stuff like that. So performance is actually my world. You know, I'm really familiar with that. And then I thought, why not try to express myself in a performance kind of work, although maybe seems to be a little bit strange for people because I mix my own idea with the sort of traditional practice. That's how it started.
Was that in the 1980s?
Yeah, early 80s, yeah.
Wow. And you said you had something to say, or you were trying to express yourself. What sort of things were you trying to say?
Yeah, at that time I lived under the military dictator and really ruthless, and there's no such freedom of expression. We didn't know nothing about that, but of course we want to say something. Underground, of course, we have to do it. I wanted to say something about how I feel so unfree.
Right.
Yeah.
And was it easier? You had a traditional sort of training in dance and so on. Do you think that made it easier for your audiences to understand what you were communicating, or was that not really a concern?
Well, I guess that is a bridge, of how they can read my message. Otherwise, maybe it's been difficult, if I just do it like my own way. But slowly, of course, it's changing as well. After they get used to my sort of early performance, which is like has this element of tradition, and then of course I also on the process of creating my work and changing, evolving, from time to time. But then I have my audience, people who appreciate what I'm doing, and I guess slowly they got to learn my language, and I got then more appreciation from international art scenes, and I think still up to today.
Right. I was going to ask you about that. As an artist who, nowadays the interest in contemporary Asian art is obviously huge, and Art Hong Kong's a kind of symbol of that in market terms. But you have been very active from well before any sort of market boom. What was your first experience in terms of the international sort of art scene? When did you first take your practice overseas? Or were you invited to go somewhere, or did you go looking?
Yeah, at that time, for the first time, we got to know about curator from abroad coming to look for artists to Indonesia. Then I got to learn also term like performance art. I didn't know before that my work is actually called performance art. Okay.
Wow.
And then, they started to invite artists, and I was invited, remember, first to Australia, and then Japan, and then after that.
Right. When was that?
Everywhere. That was early 90s.
Right.
Yeah,
so you already had obviously quite an established practice before you realized you were doing performance art in an international context.
Right. I was already under arrest, by the military. I was already chased by radical Muslims. So then it's nice to be invited to outside world, abroad.
And then chased by curators.
Yes, right. Non-stop running away.
And you've run to a lot of places, in a way. Not running, but also searching.
Right.
Yeah. Could you tell us, are you also practicing, you've done performance, but you had a painting background, you've done videos, I think. What other aspects of your practice are there?
Yeah, that sort of mediums, art mediums, painting, video, beside performance art. And I also implement text, because I'm also actually a writer and a poet. So that is also, you can see in my work. It's often appear.
Right. And not to dwell too much on it, but what was the work that you brought to Australia for your first sort of international?
Oh yes, performance and installation. It's about myself as belong to a certain kind of culture coming from Indonesia. So I did this performance wearing Balinese dance costume. But then I put myself inside a box of, box to carry goods. Yeah, I'm just a commodity. Yeah. Then when the box is open, I go out and doing my performance,
right.
And then people say, nice, being paid, and then put in the box again and shipped somewhere else.
That seems to be a comment on that whole process of being invited to perform your international artist role.
Yes, my kind of cynical comment.
And that was the early 90s. A lot of stuff has happened since then.
Yeah, sure.
What sort of issues, how have the issues that you are looking at in your practice changed in the last, say, 15 years or so?
Right. Yeah, at the beginning, I'm questioning a lot about my position as a woman in a Muslim society where I come from. And then also in the context of Indonesian non-democratic society at that time. So then, it's more like my sort of position I question. But then later it's evolved into my position in the community, because Indonesian society, although now democratic, considered to be democratic and modern, but previous sort of cultural pattern there as a communal kind of community is still there. Is still operating. So I'm in between of this situation. Maybe it's a transitional kind of situation. And then I try to go in between. Right.
And how can I say? Sometimes there's there's the impression that practices such as performance or experimental sort of contemporary art doesn't really relate to traditional societies or communities the way that you've described. What sort of relationships have you formed in your community?
Right. As I explained, because my reality is the communal life is still there. So I try to negotiate with it, although I'm really happy to be myself as an individual, but I know I'm not alone. And I want to have a communication with the people around me, right? So then I developed also this so-called community-based kind of art project, at least for last decade until today.
Could you give us an example of something that you've been working on in Indonesia?
In Indonesia, yeah, I've been working with the community that usually poor and or struck by disaster. Like we have Indonesia, is famous for disaster, you know, earthquake, volcano eruption, you name it, everything, right?
Right.
So I've been trying to do something with the community there. And Islamic boarding school community, for example. Well, although I have a lot of fight with community leaders, but it's working until today.
So it's a form of negotiation.
That's right. And communication.
Right.
I also feel the need to communicate my ideas, my art,
yes,
to the rest of the people, the community, you know.
Is there any separation for you between your art projects and your community engagements? Is there a line for you, or?
Well, yes and no. I mean, with the community art project, actually I try to break that line, yeah. But after I break that line, I realize also that I also need a space for myself. So that's why I'm now really like returning a lot to my painting as my really, really personal kind of thing, you know.
Right. Right. I have had a chance to talk to you earlier about the project that you're working on at the moment. I should kind of explain. Arahmaiani is actually transiting in Hong Kong on her way to China to continue working on a project there. Could you tell us a little bit about what you're going to do? I know it's in Yushu.
Yep. Well, yeah, this is the project that I have been doing for almost last couple of years. I've been working with Tibetan monks up in the roof of the world, really up there. And we are actually, this is an art project for me. But of course, what is art project, right? Within that context, I don't know if you know about the situation up there, but anyway, we decided to focus on environmental issues because
so with the Tibetan monks.
Monks, yes, because Tibetan Plateau is actually very. It's called the third pole. You know the two poles.
The third pole.
Yeah, and then it's also Asia Water Tower, where 7 biggest rivers in Asia originated from there, and more than 2 billion Asians living from the water coming from there. And but now the situation is somehow needs special attention because the glacier are melting and also the permafrost already melting.
Right. So this is a kind of environmental project for you?
Yes, to save a little bit of the water for us, the Asian.
How did it come about? When you described it to me the first time we spoke, it seemed to be a kind of mystery to you as well. How did you find yourself traveling to Yushu, which is actually in Qinghai province?
Yeah, actually it's a kind of accident, actually. I was doing this art project for MOCA in Shanghai for a show on Indonesian contemporary art. And then I said, well, if you want to show my community-based kind of work, so I better work with the community somewhere in China. So what kind of community? Anyway, a community with problems, struck by disaster. And then they say, oh yeah, there's an earthquake in Yushu a few months ago. Would you like to go there? wow, that's my specialty, earthquake, yes. Because I used
natural
to work,
disaster artist.
yeah, and I used to work with the community back home in Yogyakarta, hit by earthquake in 2006, where 4,000 people in my own district, pass away. So I said, okay, I will go there. Then I went, then, somehow I met these monks, the lamas, and then somehow the work evolved into project until today.
So what sort of things have you decided? What sort of projects have you put into place with the lamas concretely?
Right. So it's almost 2 years by now. So what we have done is we had cleaned up at least that area, So garbage management being introduced there. And then we have planted so far 60,000 pine trees and 1,000 of herbal medicinal trees. And then we introduced people outside monastery as well, how to deal with, garbage, and also introducing like bags, personal bottles and stuff like that, to reduce the plastic especially. Yeah, and what we are doing at the moment, we are also planting vegetables now. So back to organic, and we are preparing books for herbal medicinal books and recipe of traditional organic Tibetan cuisine.
It's a lifestyle shift. Have you had any resistance or sort of trouble in those negotiations? What's the response?
I'm so lucky, actually, because the response is very positive from either Tibetan or the Chinese. The local government is approved, and that's why I'm going back there again. Because that is also the message, This is more of concern for humanity in general, not just Tibetan in particular. And since we are now dealing with these environmental challenges and how to go about it, and then we have to sort of deal with that together, hand in hand, because this is about our problems.
Yeah, it seems, particularly in places like China, there's been a lot of controversies about tainted foods or, poisons finding their way into river systems, and people often forget that these sorts of issues don't really respect the boundaries and the borders. You've said to me a number of times that the importance is the environmental sort of human aspect and nothing to do with the political.
Yes, definitely. Because, this concern for environment and for humanity is like the main reason. So if politics is just bringing people in conflict and, another disaster, why should we go into that direction? We better go to another alternative way where people can build or rebuild that world in that part of the world better.
Have you had much connection with, with Tibetan sort of Buddhism, for example? Is this a new world that you're moving into, or what sort of experience do you have with that?
Yeah, this is new and not, Why I said new and not is I said that I went there for the first time and I never knew Tibetan before I went to Yushu. But I used to live in Thailand and somehow get to understand and to learn that connection from the past time, because Indonesia, although now known as a Muslim country, but before my ancestor converted into Islam, my ancestor was Hindus and then Buddhist. Buddhism was there for a long time, for more than 1,000 years. And if you know this Borobudur temple, the largest Buddhist temple is actually in Java. It's like 1 hour from Yogyakarta where I live. And I have been working around that temple for more than a decade, actually, working with the community around there. Yeah, so this is something, as I said, new but not new.
Right. Is there an active Buddhist community in Java?
Yes, there is, although they are very small, but very active, yes. And I'm, in a way, also working with them. Mm-hmm.
And this time that you go to Qinghai, what sort of things will you be discussing? What's the next step for your project there?
Well, the next step is, there are a lot of monastery and monks in the Kham area itself. There are around 20,000 monks, and they are interested in doing these things. So we will have a kind of meeting and organizing how to, work out, the environmental problems up there, at least maybe in the Kham area, because, probably some other area is not so easy situation today, but Kham is relatively quite calm. So, then we might be able to, do this, continue working on this project. Yeah.
Just as a matter of interest, you've said that it's similar for you, whether it's art or environment. What about the lamas? Do they introduce you as an Indonesian artist, or how do they make sense of your role?
Well, yes, of course. I'm like, for them, like suddenly coming from another planet, yeah.
An environmental alien.
Yeah, and drop down there, and then, who is this woman? I'm an artist from Indonesia, I said, and who are you working for? Nobody except myself, And then they say, yes, but you are actually Tibetan in your past life. Sure, why not?
Right. Okay. Just lastly, I heard you mention that you've also been curating, and I know that you're still based in Indonesia. How do these practices, how do these projects also influence your role now as a kind of educator or curator for another generation of local artists?
Yeah, okay, with this curating job, I have been doing this for last few years actually, and I try to implement different approach from the most practice of curatorial in Indonesia, and mostly dealing with artists who are interested in working on this kind of direction, like what I'm doing, I have to say maybe non-commercial, in fact, but we are not against the the market, but we want to have our space so we can develop our own kind of work. And this approach of curatorial is really demanding actually, because I asked the artists to work with me and have regular meeting of discussing their ideas and how it is evolving. So really quite demanding. But some of these young artists, they are really happy, and they have been working now for years with me, and they are now in quest of, hey, better we build a school. So, and I'll be the teacher. And I said, whoa, that would be too demanding for me.
Would that be where would that be? In
Yogyakarta. It will be based in Jogja, yeah. I think the art community in Jogja, unlike any other places, I have to tell you, is actually very strong. And support from its community is also really good. So that would be an ideal place for me if I have to do such things. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a good trip, a very productive trip. And I hope to hear more about it in another few months' time.
You will, for sure. And thank you for inviting me to have a talk here, and you are all being here to listen to my talk. Thank you.
Thanks.